Hello and welcome to Living Legacies of the Ozarks, a program that we hope will bring the hope and hospitality of the Ozarks to you. We're glad that you're with us. My name is Hayden Head, and I'm happy to introduce my co-host, Mrs. Sue Head. Now, you know I'm so happy. Sue, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm especially happy today because we are in the Star Schoolhouse located on the campus of the College of the Ozarks. And we are very excited about our guest today. Her family has a lot of history in this area, and she is a good friend of ours. So let me introduce Becky Roberts. Becky, can you tell us a little bit about you and your family in this area?
Well, Sue, I grew up in Forsyth and have always lived there. Married, and my husband and I have 2 children. They're both grown and have given us 6 grandchildren that we love and adore, and they are growing. And interestingly enough, the home that we built 30 years ago is built on property that my grandparents gifted us. Wow. And never would I realize, or never would I have thought, that when I was a little girl with them planting pine trees on some of their 40 acres, that one day part of that would be my front yard. Mm-hmm. And we have massive 30, 40, 50 foot pine trees. And anytime anyone gets near those, I'm very panicky. But Forsyth's always been my home. It's a community that I love and have grown up in.
Well, Becky, I'm really excited for you to share a very special part of your family's history because it's near and dear to me and to the college because your grandfather, Joseph Gideon, was the first graduate of the School of the Ozarks in 1913. Can you share a little bit about his story?
Yes. First of all, my grandfather died in 1980 at the age of 96 years old. So we lived very close, my parents and my brother and I, to my grandparents. So I think I've had an unusual situation that maybe others don't have. The fact that I was in and out of my grandfather's and grandmother's home every day. And I'm sure there are days that they wanted to send us right back. But because I had that experience, I was able to see into their lives. And as I grew up and got older, I was able to understand what the values were and why they lived the lives they did, which was faith, family, and country. And those 3 ideals guided their life. Grandfather, as you know, graduated in 1913, the only person in that class. But let's remember, when that class started, as I understand it, from both he and my grandmother, there was up to 25 students. My grandmother was one of them. By the time they got to that senior year in high school, unfortunately, some of those students had to drop out because they simply needed to return home to work their family farms. Some became ill and couldn't continue. That was my grandmother's story. And she always kind of regretted that. But years later, Dr. Graham Clark came to their home one day, and she was probably in her 80s, and gave her graduation diploma.
Oh, I love that story.
And it meant a great deal to her. Some people exaggerate history, and they take a family tale or whatever, and they add to it. What I'm sharing to you is as I experienced it. Our grandparents were dedicated Christians in their faith. My grandfather learned a great deal coming to the School of the Ozarks, which of course was founded by a Presbyterian minister. And he became a part of that faith all throughout his life. He After graduating from School of the Ozarks, he and my grandmother got married in, I believe, 1915. And they lived in Forsyth, the old town of Forsyth, which is where the current location of Shadow Rock Park is. And they had 5 children. I know that by 1918, my grandfather was on the Forsyth School Board. He was from a family of 9 children. And going back just a moment, it's hard to realize, but he was almost 29 years old when he graduated high school, that being at the School of the Ozarks. And that being because education was so important to him. He knew what struggles his family and families around him went through, and he wanted to better himself, and he felt the only way to do that was education. So they carried the principles, going back to their family, they carried those principles and values in our family all during their lives. They were married 67 years when my grandfather passed, and my grandmother lived another about 14 months. She was about 9 years younger than him. But I can tell you that going to church on Sunday morning, they never missed until they got to a point that their age kind of prohibited that. But going to church on Sunday morning was something you didn't even, that was just your routine, that was your duty. And my grandmother was extremely strict about, you do not work on Sunday. To the point that I remember as a child, my dad was in the construction business, and one Sunday he worked because it rained all week and he had to squeeze in a day. My grandmother was very upset. She gave me a lecture. I don't know that I ever told my dad. But at family gatherings, one of the things you might find interesting at especially Christmas, their home was there in Forsyth where the O'Reilly Automotive is now. And they had a large old oak buffet. There was always a compote, a large glass compote filled with candies. There was another one filled with nuts. And then my grandmother always made a fruit salad. And that was the School of the Ozarks fruit salad. I mean, those were standard things. And at Christmas time, our family all came together. 4th of July, at Thanksgiving, we were a close family. Now, of course, as the years have gone by, and we've all grown, and now we're the older generation. Unfortunately, people are spread out more than we once were, so we don't get together as often. But I can say for myself, the experience I had with them and the way they lived their life was an example to me. They loved gardening. They had an orchard. They drove to Ozark back in those days and bought trunkfuls of pine trees and planted them. They were very, very dedicated war moms and dads during World War II. Of course, before I came along, but I realized it more and more each day because I happened to have mementos of theirs and of their 5 sons who sent those to my grandparents. My grandmother made a box for each of her sons. And my father told me later when they came home, each at a different time from World War II, those boxes were there. And that brings up a really interesting thing, and this is very emotional. When my father, he and his twin brother were in Germany, they were in the 16th Armored Division, and they were able to remain together. Now, they do not do that anymore, but they were twins. They were in the same tank and together all during World War II. They were in Le Havre, France. They were in Czechoslovakia. They were in Pilsen, Germany. And my father always has taken a lot of pictures, even then. So we have some of those. My father was one of the last ones to come home. By that time, my grandfather, Joe, was prosecutor, was trying a case in Old Forsyth in the courthouse. They knew at what time, or they knew the approximate day that my father would arrive, but no other details. So my father came into town on a bus from Springfield, and when he got in town, he said he saw his father's Buick parked in front of the courthouse. So he went over, and he learned that his dad was in court. And so my dad set his suitcase outside the door of the courtroom, and he quietly slipped in and sat on the back row. I do not remember who the judge was that was overseeing this trial, but a point came, and the judge said to my grandfather, who had not noticed this, he said, "Mr. Gideon, there's someone in this courtroom you want to see." And of course, my dad was in uniform. And so the judge called a recess. And my dad said that when his father turned around, he stood up. And you can imagine what a heartwarming and thankful reunion that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story.
You're
That's
welcome.
Beautiful.
In fact, thank you for sharing the story of your family. And when you talk about their gardening, I mean, maybe there's no better image of a legacy than planting a tree. You know, when you talk about them with their orchard and the pine trees, and clearly the values that they held on to and that you and your family continue to hold on to. I mean, that's what legacy is all about.
Well, and there are deep, deep roots of your family in this area, and we're so grateful that you took the time to visit with us today and tell us a little bit of your story.
You're
Thank
welcome.
You.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing your story and your family. And thank you for joining us here at Living Legacies of the Ozarks. We hope you have a great day.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy,